Your Excellency, good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Yes, good afternoon. Afternoon already. This has been a hectic 3 days, and I think going by what the chairman started us out on, it was going to be hard work anyways. Because getting the ERGB to drive us on a path to recovery is hard work. So the ERGP is Nigeria's defined path out of poverty. At the heart of the things we have earmarked to do is to drive a process of restoring growth. And we've spent a significant amount of time discussing that in this summit, investing in our people. And there has been a range of sessions and breakouts and discussions that have dealt with that, and building a globally competitive economy. In driving the thematic, thank you. In driving the thematic areas that lead us to the ERGP, at the summit we conceptualize certain thematic pillars which we have interrogated. Think Nigeria. Skills, competences and capacity, access to capital, legislation, economic inclusion, as the drivers for the trajectory of recovery and growth. We've also spent a lot of time in discussing the sectoral imperatives for the drivers of the sectors that will drive these thematic areas. A lot of time has been spent interrogating infrastructure, the critical aspects of infrastructure, strategic priorities, and how to de-risk it and get it going, manufacturing, and how to expand our capacity, renewable energy, agriculture and agribusiness, mass housing and trade. And we have sustained this conversation around certain principles. The principles of leveraging the private sector, tackling constraints to growth, cohesion and social inclusion, free market, and upholding the principles of a market economy as the fundamentals for creating opportunities, for expanding productivity, and for creating the employment for our teeming population, and dealing with the inherent challenge of an explosion of our population by 2050. Some of the government efforts to date that are commendable include all the interventions taken on to ramp up oil production, revitalization of our railway sector, which is supported by the ongoing concession and reforms, the closer government and business consultations that have gone on this year, the implementation of the social investment programs, power sector initiatives that have brought power generation up, including of the commitment to unlock the distribution systems gridlock that we have experienced, diversification of the economy through de-risking and expanding the agri-value chain capabilities, the ease of business reforms, both the PBEC and the NASBA, the legislative process, which has gained significant commitment from both the executive and legislature, and the MSME clinics that have kicked off around the country. If we get it right, we should see unemployment drop. We should see GDP grow, we should see inflation drop, and we should see expanded private sector investment. If we get it right, we should see our ranking in doing business move up to possibly the top 50 countries in Nigeria, and we should see more Nigerians rise above the poverty line. But getting it right means all of us must go to work. And it's not just federal government, it's all of us. We must unlock Nigeria's economic potential by getting every region of Nigeria to go back to productive economic activities. And as you can see, there is none of us that cannot be put to work outside an oil-led economy. All of us has something to give. So all of us must be put to work. To transform our experience, therefore, we must do certain things. And the summit has raised many recommendations that are too much to name. By the design of this summit, many things happened. One was that we had 30 discussions, design sessions, each generating significant action plans. So permit me not to attempt to rattle out 30 different action plans, because except you want us to be here till evening. However, sector-specific presentations will be made available, and those sector-specific presentations will support the federal government's Sector Lab initiative that will kick off in 2 weeks. But we've said some things here that we need to think Nigeria. That in thinking Nigeria, we must benchmark our reforms, not just in terms of the indicators of doing business, but the speed. The first session we had this year pointed to the speed of getting things done. We must provide tangible incentives, and we must support government's process and policies on the margins of preference. There's a lot to do in de-risking infrastructure. So executive order to streamline the PPP process to allow for better PPP packaging to attract capital flows will be critical. The commitment to intensify the implementation of the executive order for 24-hour port operations needs speedy execution, and a need to declare a state of emergency on the gridlock that has rendered our seaports inefficient, ineffective, and for most, unable to deliver the substantial value we deserve. We must incorporate policy frameworks for the transport sector, was a proposal, but beyond the transport sector, from several of the discussions we had 15 different proposals on transport, on policy reforms. So, of course, we can't list all of them here, but to say that policy reform in the action plans form a critical component. Skills, competency, and capacity building is a key issue. Many of the sessions raised the deficit of skills, and we agreed that there will be a need to develop an integrated national TVET program that allows us to scale. We are talking of 30 million Nigerians that we need to put to work. And many of them need to be skilled, artisanal, semi-skilled, workforce development and capacity programs will be essential to make that happening, leveraging technology to drive success. Access to capital has come up practically in every session, and the recommendations are several, and there is a clear requirement for ongoing consultation and for some deeper level of reform proposals, studies to be done. I will try not to recap on access to capital because there's a lot that has been said about that. On financial inclusion, in the spirit of subnational engagement, during this summit, the NESG signed a memorandum of understanding with the Nigeria's Governors Forum, amongst other things, to implement systematic regional economic summits and subnational summits to deal with specific subnational competitive advantage and unique economic potential areas. Some of the other commitments that we're driving in that regard is, of course, to reduce the complexity and the cost of securing certificates of occupancy and integrating the largest population of our workforce, which is in agriculture, through cooperatives, etc. The last element in terms of recommendations is in the area of legislation. We have a total of 104 legislations that we've identified that need to be reviewed or amended. And we have bills, 14 critical bills that can drive the economy before the National Assembly for harmonization. We got commitment yesterday from the members of the National Assembly on the speed with which they will expedite action to deliver that before the end of the year for assent by the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. In addition to this, the breakout sessions identified 17 pieces of legislative reforms outside of the 104. So we told the lawmakers yesterday that we are willing to jump into the ring and will apply optimum pressure to ensure that these laws are not just passed, but they are signed into law, and that we can extract the economic benefit from the legislations that will drive reforms, that will drive our economic recovery and growth. Now, the NESG has driven this process for 23 years. 23 years. It's interesting. In 1997, we spoke about Vision 2010. In 2007, we spoke about putting Nigeria to be positioned as the top 20 economies in the world. And we came here to discuss recovery this year. The question is, what is going to be different going forward? Here is the fact: we can no longer do business as usual. And I think the last plenary has raised these issues. So, how can we avoid being here next year telling the same stories? We must act different. If you take a look at pre-colonial Nigeria and you look at the issues we are confronting today, so many issues have not changed. And it begs the question, why? Reality check is that by 2050, there will be 500 million Nigerians, and the scale and pace of governance and reforms is simply no longer acceptable for the future that we deserve and desire. It's simply no longer acceptable. And all of us are responsible, all of us are accountable, and all of us must go to work. So, if you think of where we came from as Nigeria, countries that started with us or before us, this is what we've noticed. And we are left there dealing with issues that we should have been way past. What are the characteristics that have kept us behind? We have to ask those questions. The first is lack of leadership. Across board, the blame can go around and all of us can share. But we must accept there has been a lack of leadership, a lack of political will at all levels. It takes more than the president to get things done. It takes ministers. For an economic summit where we have economic areas, we would have ended this session, for example, with far more economic policy stakeholders in the room. Weak institutions. We can talk all we like. We had a governance institutions breakout session where we said, look, if we do not grow the capacity of government to execute its own imperatives, we will go nowhere. Low skill levels. We say these things, but when we look for the capacity to get it done, we find very little capacity to do the work. Then there's corruption. We must accept that if Nigerians feel overtaxed, when the tax to GDP is so low compared to other countries, the cost of corruption is playing a part. Lack of inclusiveness. The question of lack of inclusiveness in all its ramifications, in all its dimensions, has brought us to a point That point, ladies and gentlemen, is the precipice of national dislocation with growing national mistrust. If this continues at the rate at which our population is growing, we create an unsustainable future which none of us can coexist in. Whether you're in the north, the south, whether you're Christian or Muslim, whether you're rich or poor. Because if you're still rich, you will have to go somewhere and enjoy those riches, not here. Therefore, the imperatives for us are clear. Business as usual is over. So at the top line, we must be decisive. We need leadership, not just in government. We need leadership in business. We need leadership in civil society. We need the voices of Auntie-Obi as much as we need leaders in government and in business, so that together we can hold ourselves accountable. We need political will. We need to grow business confidence to act together. We need citizen engagement that is committed, not after everything has gone wrong. Then we get together and say, well, they got it wrong. To do so, collaborative systems of engagement must emerge. We must agree we need to do it together. We must agree we can hold each other accountable. We must agree that we must engage, and the engagements will not always be sweet, but we must commit to getting it done. Because the prospect of not getting it done is simply no longer sustainable. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, everyone's hands must be on deck. So execution capability will not just be a government capability. When we say we want to get the economy growing, we need government to pay attention to simple things like financing and executing its own budget. When you discuss with our partners in government, cash disbursements after a budget is passed is epileptic and problematic. When you discuss with private sector, we are waiting for something else to happen to get together to ask what can we do to cluster together and invest. We must coordinate in such a way that there's a coordinated resourcing of our growth by private sector, clear commitments and clear sectoral commitments, clear government commitments, and clear civil society commitment. Civil society must come together and ask, what impacts are we committed to holding Nigeria accountable for and delivering? In this regard, our international partners, members of the diplomatic community, international donors, and local national NGOs will play a big role in making sure this happens. Together, therefore, we must, one, have a sense of urgency. It must not take us 3 months to start sector labs. It must not take us another 4 months to get the infrastructure recommendations from the Infrastructure Policy Commission going. It must not take us another year to say the 17 policy instruments that the discussions we had here pointed to will be translated into policies that we will execute. We must get it done. There must be a bias for disciplined action that ensures our future will be different, not because we hope. I keep telling Nigerians, hope is not a strategy. Not because we hope so, but because we determine so by our actions and by our commitment. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, accountability will be the watchword as we move this ship of state into its harbor of national destiny. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.